All right, so today we got to talk a little bit more about BLM. Now, again, they're haunting the news over the last few months because of all these um, questionable killings by the police. Again, um, regardless of what you think, I think it's both rather obvious that those had nothing to do with police brutality and or racism. But again, the main thing I wanted to point out here is from Tim Pool here, and he points out among registered voters, Black Lives Matter support today is 5% lower than it was before George Floyd. While BLM saw a huge spike after Floyd died, those gains were not only erased, but the gains made before that were erased as well. The BLM riots backfired bad. Now, again, the first thing I want to point out too is that when you talk with a lot of people these days, specifically the leftists, specifically the more people on the far left, they assume that that rational people support BLM when the reality is it's not true, right? Like, according to this, what you're looking at 17%. Now we're looking at 12%. So again, the vast majority of people do not support BLM. If you ask people a specific poll saying, "Hey, do you support BLM? Do you agree with BLM?" Yeah, a lot of people would support that. But if you ask people, "Do you agree with the ideas of BLM?" and not bring up BLM, like do you support defund the police? The vast majority of people don't even believe that, including blacks, right? Like, even the majority of blacks do not want less cops, right? I'm going to make a video about that pretty soon as well. But again, this is the problem too, that the left just simply manipulates language, right? Like with how they do with BLM and Antifa and all this kind of stuff, and that they're like, "Oh, well, if you disagree with BLM, it must mean you're a racist," right? Well, no, the reality is that if you disagree with BLM, you're not disagreeing, you're not thinking that black lives don't matter. What you're really disagreeing with is the idea that, violently rioting and looting is okay, and defunding the police is a good idea. That's what people are really saying. The problem is a lot of people are afraid to say it too. Like, the amount of people afraid to say that they don't support BLM is a lot higher than the amount of people that are afraid to say they do, right? Because the mainstream media is propping them up. You have one major political side that's, pretty much by default agreeing and supporting all the rioting and the looting. Um, so again, that's why a lot of these people believe it too, because not to mention too, these people they're in bubbles, right? Like, they're in massive echo chambers, because if you actually genuinely think that the majority of people want to defund the police and support rioting and looting, especially when there's no reason for it, like, it'd be one thing if there were legitimate racist attacks, right? But or police brutality, but George Floyd and Jacob Blake are not examples of those. Like, neither one of those are. George Floyd died of a drug overdose. The autopsy very clearly shows that. The body camera footage clearly points to that as well. Jacob Blake was a violent criminal who got shot because he violently resisted arrest while going for a knife. The evidence is so overwhelmingly clear in those cases, it's not even funny. Now, I think the George Floyd, the cops could have handled that a little bit better. They probably should have um, conducted CPR sooner. They were a little slow on calling an ambulance, which that wasn't Chauvin's fault. Chauvin brought up, I believe, on the body camera footage that I don't know exactly how it goes in cop speak, but when you call for an ambulance, there's multiple ways you can call for it. There's code this and code that. And when the cops originally called for the ambulance, they called for um, the not as fast of an ambulance, right? And Chauvin said, "No, you got to upgrade that because we need to get it here sooner," right? So that's just another piece of evidence that points towards the fact that they were not. It's not murder. It's not manslaughter. Could they have handled the case better? Yeah, but the whole knee on the neck thing had absolutely nothing to do with it. If you want to criticize the cops, you criticize them for the fact that they were kind of lollygagging when it came to administering CPR or calling an ambulance, right? But again, that's a different story in and of itself. But again, this is something I wanted to point out because again, you have a very large percent of the population that thinks that the majority of people agree with BLM when it's not even the case. Like the majority of blacks do support BLM from the polls I've seen. Again, that may have changed. But the majority of blacks do not support defund the police, right? The majority of the blacks do not support that. And that's one of the main things that BLM wants done, right? So this is how the left manipulates language, right? They refuse to talk about the actual facts of the matter, right? Like the minute you criticize BLM, it's, oh, you're a racist, right? The minute you criticize Antifa, it's, oh, you're a fascist, right? But they don't want to debate the actual reality behind the case, and that BLM and Antifa especially, are violent communists. You know, BLM is openly run by Marxists. They're violent, right? Like rioting and looting, I don't care how just your cause is, like I've said, is not okay. It's not okay because the people you're victimizing are innocent as well. Like the people you're victimizing are innocent as well. So again, they're literally becoming what they claim to be against. Like claiming to be against racism and all this kind of stuff, and then turning around and becoming a lynch mob yourself, you're not going to win people over for that. And the fact that so many people, again, I don't think it's a majority, but the fact that so many people agree with that just goes to show just how insane our society is these days. And speaking about this kind of garbage, Dallas Stars CEO confirms they lost a number of season ticket holders due to their stand with BLM. It's starting to happen, folks. Again, we know that ratings for these major sports leagues have been down because they've decided to side with a violent, rapist and criminal, and promote an ideology that the majority of people don't even agree with. And it's a flawed and not even true ideology, right? Like the idea that Black Lives Matter, yeah, I'm perfectly fine with, and 99.9% of the population is as well. The problem is that when people hear Black Lives Matter, different people hear different things. Like most of these people on the left here, when they hear Black Lives Matter, they think of, equality and justice and all that kind of stuff. And when people on the right, or I would say people who just aren't on the left, because I think people in the middle think of this as well overwhelmingly, they hear, violence, rioting, looting, jumping to conclusions, blaming cops for something that's, the vast majority of them are not guilty of, right? So this is the problem when it comes to this kind of stuff, is that when different people hear this, they think of different things. And that's what people need to realize too, especially people on the left, because again, people on the left tend to live in massive echo chambers. Not that there's some people on the right don't, but just a lot more likely. So yeah, that's the next thing I wanted to bring up too. And this is the other thing about sports too. Like if they keep going the way they're going, they're not gonna go out of business, but the revenue is gonna go way down, right? Like the revenue is already gonna be down in the coming year because I don't think any of these big leagues are going to allow fans, and if they do, it'll be an incredibly small amount. And I don't even think the TV ratings will go up because again, if you were to hear that they're not going to allow fans, you'd think TV ratings would be through the roof. Like that only makes sense. Um, but they're not, and they're not because a lot of people just don't want to be lectured to, right? Like sports is supposed to be a getaway from reality that you can go and you can enjoy a game, you can cheer for your team, and you can kind of have a bit of a getaway. But the problem is that when you're bringing up the stuff that you're trying to get away with, right? Like you're trying to get away from the craziness of politics and of the real world, you're only making the problem worse, right? Like that's the whole point that many people watch sports anyway. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring up there. The next thing I wanted to bring up is talking a little bit more about New York. Now, again, this is something I brought up a lot before, but again, so many people just don't seem to get this. Like you talk to these people on the left, and they're just so ignorant. It's not even funny. Like it's not even funny that on one hand they think that all their policies. Oh, we got the best policies, and we need all these left-wing policies. Well, yeah, New York and California have all these left-wing policies. New York and California have sky-high taxes. They have sky-high regulations. And not everybody, but the most amount of people are trying to move out of those states. Like again, this is the problem too, that if these left-wing policies work so well, then why is everybody, or not everybody, like I say, but so many people trying to move out of these states? Like, because they don't work, right? Like, people don't want sky high taxes and sky high regulation. Because again, if you're rich, why would you want to stay somewhere if they're going to force you to pay more money? It doesn't make any sense. And this is where the left goes completely wrong, right? Like, they're so naive to think that it doesn't matter how much money we take away from people, they're not going to want to leave here. Like, of course they do. There is a tipping point, and that is the problem too. That um, just because you raise taxes doesn't mean you'll raise revenue for the government. And this is the thing that people get completely wrong too. And they mock the other side too, which again, they're also completely wrong about, that just because you lower taxes doesn't mean that you lower revenue for the government too. And this is the thing that they definitively get wrong, that there is no debate on. Again, just because you raise taxes doesn't mean you're going to raise revenues. There's a good argument to be made that there comes a point to where you raise taxes to a certain point that you're losing revenues, right? New York's a perfect example of this. New York's going to be in a ton of trouble in the coming years and decades, like a ton of trouble. Same with California. The problem is that these people just leave these provinces, or not provinces. I mean, provinces that happens in Canada too to a degree, but the states have more power than the provinces in Canada do. Like, the states have more autonomy. The provinces in Canada don't have a whole lot of autonomy, especially when you compare it to the states. But anyway, the problem is that these people, they leave these states and they go vote for the same policies in different states. And it's the same reason why people are against immigration, right? Like, I'm not against immigration. I'm just against immigration in the sense that we bring in people from the third world and they vote for the same failed policies that they implemented, that, is the reason why they have to leave said third world countries, right? And that's what happens, is that these people are, whether it's they're that ignorant or they're just that naive. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think they are rather ignorant and naive, but they leave these areas and they go and they vote for the same stuff over and over again. Now, there is some people that wake up to that. There definitely is some, but not nearly enough, right? Like, not nearly enough. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to bring up here is from Jurgen Ampf. He says, so Shell pulls out of Alberta but invests $8 billion in Iraq. Shell thinks Iraq is a better place to do business than Canada. Guys, how are we doing? Now, again, this is just the sad state of affairs when it comes to Alberta and Canada. Canada specifically, that we're so anti-business, anti-entrepreneur, just production in general, that we're basically regulating entire industries out of business. And this is the thing too, that they always bring up, oh, well, oil and gas isn't the future, so we should be going away from it anyway. Well, if oil and gas isn't the future, then why is most of the rest of the world doubling down on oil and gas, right? Like, if it isn't the future, you'd think that these up and coming, developing countries, they would be investing in wind and solar because it's the future, right? But it isn't. It isn't, number one, because you see California now, they're the state that's, full of wind and solar, but yet they have rolling blackouts, right? Like, how's that doing for you? And not to mention too, Alberta, especially in the northern parts, like, it's not very sunny here and it's not very windy either. Like, wind and solar is not going to work. Like, it's just not going to work. Not to mention too, the production of wind turbines and solar panels still has a lot of carbon output put in the making of those. Not to mention too, solar panels, still, you lose money with solar panels. You're not going to make money with solar panels, right? And with wind turbines too, those things need to be thrown in landfills too when you're done with them. Like, the idea that the future may very well be renewable energy, or a better way of putting it is not oil and gas, but it's not going to be wind and solar. Like, unless the technology for wind and solar gets better by, like, tens of times better than it is right now, it's not going to happen at least in our lifetimes. Like, at least in our lifetimes, because the problem is that the technology, when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's getting better at a very slow rate, at least compared to, like, computers and some of these things, right, where the technology is getting, better at like the doubling time is like literally like what, like 5 years for computers. I think it's even less. But when it comes to wind and solar, like it's much lower, right? Like that's the problem. So and this is the other thing too, like I said, that the if renewables are the future, then why is the rest of the world not investing in renewables? It's the only countries that are investing in renewables is the more rich Western countries, right? Like it's literally just countries in Europe and then Canada and the States. Like that's literally the only ones. And why is that? Because, like I say, number one, oil and gas is still far superior. It's not nearly as bad as what it's made out to be, and it's way cheaper, right? Like it's way cheaper. And if there wasn't, it's still way cheaper, even though there's like so many regulations you can't even, it would take you so long to bring up the regulations. It's not even funny. And oil and gas is still way cheaper in Canada, right? Like it's still way cheaper. Just imagine if there wasn't so many regulations. Like, and this is the thing too. You look at the same thing for Ontario too. They had their whole stupid, green energy program they bring in, and the cost of energy goes way up, right? Like, I don't understand why so many people fall for this garbage. Like, I really don't. I really don't. Um, but anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up for today. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.